Hey, quick little video to talk about C-Max assembly. Wanted to give you guys a couple of tips about putting your C-Max trucks together and where the components are going to go when you receive your hardware kit. First of all, remember to clear out the printing dust from the housing, which includes the holes in the ends where the tube hole is. They tend to be full of printing dust. Sometimes they get them cleared out, but not all the time. So be sure to clear out the tubes. That goes for the front and the rear housing as well. And you should have nothing to clean out inside the diff and locker area. All the bearing seats should be perfectly good. No need to clear those out, but you will need to clear out the little tiny holes. So the small holes here that you see for the screws, these are metric 2 size screws. So we want you to use a 1/16 drill or a 1.5 millimeter drill, and simply just poke the drill in there on your drill while it's turning, and just simply clear out the dust out of the threads. You don't have to go any deeper, you just need to clear out the holes. You'll see that on the leaf spring or the link suspension trucks, there are holes on the sides here for spring and links or leafs, depending on which axle you have, and those holes you will need to clear out with a 2.5 millimeter drill or a 332 size drill, and very common stuff. But you will need to just simply run the drill through those holes really quick and easy, just to make sure there's no dust in there. You probably don't need to do the knuckle attachment pins, because they tend to be cleared out quite nicely before the housing gets blacked. Now the process for this, of course, is they're nylon printed, sintered nylon housings, and so what ends up happening is they print the housing in a big bucket of dust. They laser all the dust, nylon dust, together to create this fantastic and strong TM8 axle housing. And then what happens is they send that housing over to a tumbling sort of media blaster type of a machine that actually sprays material at it, and it does a bit of a finish polish on it. It gets rid of all the dust, and sometimes they clear out really well in the tubes after the washing and the spraying, but sometimes they don't. And so the end holes tend to be cleared out because they're outside near the media, and the little holes in the middle tend to not be cleared out quite so well. So do clear out the holes with the small drill on the cover, and do clear out the holes for the leaf mount holes and the shock mount and such, so that they are ready. And the instructions, of course, are on the Shapeways store for each product. I'll also make another mention that you'll see in your hardware kit that you've got front CVDs and a whole bunch of bearings. There's bearing sizes for the wheels that are different than the bearings in the housing. Pay attention to how those fit, and it might be necessary for you to actually kind of press the bearings together. I would recommend that when you're assembling these, that you push the bearing in this side. You can use the diff input shaft to press the bearing on the inside, and you can also use the diff input shaft to press the bearing on the outside. Be careful not to stress the housing sideways while you're pushing on stuff. Just simply put probably a socket, the kind of socket you would use on a ratchet set. They work really well for finding a socket size that would match the bearing, and then you can use that for support while you're putting the bearings into the housing. And I would also recommend that if you feel like you assemble your ring and pinion and it kind of feels like it's grindy or notchy, then I would recommend you simply very lightly tap on the end of the input shaft, or maybe you need to tap on the gear side of the input shaft, and just simply knock it around just a little bit. Just tap it around a little bit, and that will seat the bearings better, and you will get rid of that notchy bearing sort of a feel that you have there. It'll also make the bearings last a really long time. So I highly recommend a little bit of a tap to in either direction, so that you can get rid of the notchy feeling in the pinion bearings. When you're assembling the knuckles that come with the hardware kit, you'll notice here that there are no screws on top of the knuckle or on the bottom of the knuckle. We do that on purpose. We want it to be as clean and smooth as possible, and so you'll notice in your kit there's probably a bunch of extra hardware in your kit, different screws that could be used for all kinds of different things. The set screws that you find in your kit, the long 12mm set screws, they are designed to attach the knuckle here through the C-hub that's part of the axle housing. So you will have a set screw here, and you will have another set screw on top, and the result is that you get a very clean finish to going through the bushing on the knuckle. Very clean on the bottom, and that just keeps the ornaments from the lawn and whatever else you end up driving over. It just keeps them from hanging up on the axle, and there's no screws in the way. And of course the steering is very free because you don't have any compression on it with screw heads. So that's part of the important part of this design, is that we want it to be clean and very free. Having really free steering like this, very free moving steering, means that you don't use as much power in your servo. You don't require as much power, but you also don't use as much power, and that helps your battery length last much longer as well. So there's a couple of little tricks that we want to do here and make sure that you guys are giving nice free steering, and part of that is we use set screws instead of captured screws. So please do use the set screws. I recommend before you drive that you turn your knuckle all the way sideways and spray some kind of a wet lube into the CVD. We use fluid film over here in Canada. Fluid film is a waxy, greasy sort of a spray lubricant, and a very little bit is all you need to give that metal some lubrication between the contact, and please do both sides of your CVD shaft. Obviously there's nothing to do here because our diff input shaft captures the bearing, and there's no visual, you can't get any dirt in there at all. So once your cover is mounted, before you tighten down your cover, please seat all the screws barely contacting the cover. I want you to unlearn the idea of cranking hard on the wrench. Do not crank on the wrench. Do not crank on your wrench. This is a plastic housing, and the cover is a very thin plastic lip all the way around, which will last a long time and keep all the water and dirt out for a very long time, as long as you don't over tighten the screws and bend the cover into a banana by putting too much force on it. So please pay attention to, when you're putting these little tiny screws in, that you make contact with the cover, and that's all. You don't want to tighten them. You will squish the cover. So moving on to the rear of the truck, I will talk to you about the back of the truck now. And so basically all of the same rules apply when you're dealing with the rear TM8 housing. You're going to clear out the holes here with a small drill, and then you're going to clear out all of the M3 size holes with the larger 2.5 drill or 3/32, and that will prep all the holes, get all the dust out. You may also have to use a much larger drill to clear the dust that's inside the axle tube. Make sure that before you assemble it, you can see right through the axle, so that when you put the shafts into the housing, you don't end up jamming a bunch of dirt into your locker, or dust I should say. So give you a couple of tips on assembling these. First of all, I want to tell you about some of the shims and spacers that come in the kit. You might find in your kit that you've got these little tiny washers. They're very thin, but sort of a large diameter washer. These have a specific purpose. You'll see here that the pinhole on the front axle housing here, this pin is perfect spacing for using a Vatera style hex, which was our original intention, but we've decided to switch to a regular aluminum hex and a regular pin. And so in the front axle housing, you might find that there's a little space. These shims are intended to go over top of the front axle so that you can tighten down your wheel hex all the way and feel like you have a nice solid secure space. You can see I've put the shims on the axle right here, and these three little shims, you're going to use 3 shims per side. The 3 shims will take up the space in the front axle between the pin and the bearing. Okay, so that's what the 3 shims are for. If you don't have 3 shims in your kit, then you probably have our updated axle shaft design, which we have changed partway through production so that the shaft pin is slightly farther in, and we've eliminated the shims. In the rear hardware kit, you will also find this little silver aluminum shim. And you're probably wondering, well, what on earth does this thing do? Well, the aluminum shim actually is specifically intended to go over every one of the rear axle housings, the rear axle shafts, and it fits over the shaft, and you slide it over top of the pin area, and it actually fits right inside the bearing cap. Okay, this is really important because what happens is the pin that has the hex on it actually pushes against, the pin itself pushes against that aluminum spacer that goes right into the bearing cap. The aluminum spacer is then touching on the other side of the bearing, and so when you put your hex on there and you assemble it, you don't have any more axle float. You can see on this side I do not have the spacer in it, and if you watch here carefully you can see the axle floats in and out, right? So if you don't use the metal spacer in there, then your hex will eventually rub away on the outside of the bearing cap, and you don't want to do that. So that's what this little aluminum spacer is for on the rear axle kit. And it goes onto the axle shaft so that the pin will push on the spacer, and then that will push on the bearing, and it will eliminate all of your rear axle float. So that's where those shims go, and if you have any questions or need any help with your assembly, please do send a note to gcmracing.ca. We will try to help you get your TM8 axle shafts in properly and get all of your screws in properly. And remember again that these are plastic housings, and so you want to eliminate the need to crank down the screws. Do not crank down the screws. You simply make contact and let the threads bite in the way that the nylon does, and you will have your screws locked in for life. So please remember to not over crank the screws, and happy building. If you have any questions, we will try to help you out. Thanks for watching.